Hello, Horrorphiles. You're listening to Dissecting Horror, examining the anatomy of fear in film, television, and literature. I'm writer and performer Kelsey Zukowski.
I'm filmmaker Stephen Aguilera. In this episode, we'll examine two very different Christmas-themed horror films, Rare Exports and Krampus, along with a general deep dive into the realm of Christmas horror. This discussion will be spoiler-free.
We are the Horror Whisperers, your champions of horror and keepers of the fearscape, on this podcast of frightsome delights, if you will.
I will, and we hope you will join us too, won't you?
There's always something about Christmas horror just largely associated with the innocent, carefree, and joyful ripping apart the layers, finding a more sinister, even a hidden core. Christmas horror shows a cruel, gritty viciousness as a forewarning and morality tale largely. Although there are the ones that just totally tackle ridiculous concepts like a radioactive serial killing snowman or a simple yet ruthless killing spree with punny jokes galore. The over-the-top Christmas horror is fun, but there are dark, enticing roots in the holiday that can be intensely interesting and very chilling. Where the gimmick isn't needed, there is true terror that digs at something deeper and more relatable when Santa, St. Nicholas, or Krampus offers a balance between darkness and light, reward and punishment, carefree gifts, and gruesome consequences. There are some inherent, just kind of evil notes within Christmas lore really around the world that have existed for quite a long time. There's a lot of Christmas witches, which seem to be largely underrepresented in horror films, but you could see where those kind of dark roots are taken from. They have Frau Perchta, which was a Christmas witch that kind of takes on a role similar to St. Nicholas and Krampus, known as the belly slitter because her punishment for bad behavior, where she would cut open the offender's stomach, remove their organs, and replace them with straw and pebbles.
Good God, they did not hold back, did they?
No, I mean, Krampus just like beats you a little.
Yeah, it gives you a spanking or something, but
Yeah.
This is just all out, wow.
Then there's Grilla, Icelandic witch, rooted back to the 13th century, although she became more associated with Christmas around the 17th century. Just kind of depicted as an ogress living in a cave in Iceland, where she has strange creatures that launch attack on the nearby town and misbehaving children, of course, turning them into delicious stew. Again, more carving out of the stomachs, and said that she ate her husband out of boredom.
Mm. You know, it makes me wonder if these were so extreme because children were somehow worse back then and they required a more heavy look upon these sorts of things, these morality tales. But I can see a very strong connection between witches and children. I think that's always been a thing, like with Hansel and Gretel. And that was a witch, right, in that one?
Yeah, and I think there's something, it's a big similarity to, I think, like the Grimm fairy tales and Christmas horror as a whole, or holiday horror. And even before holiday horror films, like where a lot of these legends, first came from. It was kind of that morality and sort of the threat and forewarning, which you even get in things like probably one of the most iconic Christmas stories, A Christmas Carol, haunted by these ghosts and what forewarning of what will be if you don't have this introspective kind of growth. And so to kind of like, I guess, good behavior, instilling that fear, but also I think it represents, consequence and especially Krampus, which it seemed like he kind of started as, well, either there are definitely some roots to one of the witches I mentioned, Perchta, but also even it seemed like even like a St. Nicholas, like in the beginning, he kind of would reward or punish, and it really seemed to be by the church kind of wanting to have this, light and darkness, God and devil. So they kind of seemed to, you saw a lot of comparisons between the two and having them side by side. So Krampus kind of became more this representation of that. I mean, known as the Christmas devil. And also, I like how he is kind of referred to as like the shadow of either St. Nicholas or Christmas itself. So it's kind of that, draw between punishing and consequence and good behavior almost as the other half. It's like you can have this goodness and this merriment and the joy of Christmas and you've been good, but also that there is consequences and fear and that there's this other darker side that has always kind of been a part of Christmas.
Let's get into the roots of Santa. Born in 270 AD in modern-day Turkey, Greek bishop St. Nicholas became the patron saint of gifts and children. A patron saint is a protecting or guiding saint of a person or place. St. Francis, for example, is a patron saint of animals. I grew up Catholic, but I was a shitty student, so I had to Google all that. Anyway, he was famous for being a philanthropist, which is basically one who gives to the needy. This contributes to the idea of Santa giving presents. I guess that ties into with the three wise men giving presents too, so it complemented it nicely. The root of St. Nicholas's children connection stems from a tale of him entering an inn where its keeper had murdered 3 boys and pickled their dismembered bodies in barrels in the basement, intending to sell them as ham.
Oh, wow.
7 years later, the bishop was said to have not only sensed the crime, but also found their bodies and resurrected the victims. Can you imagine the horror of 3 chopped up little boys having been put back together after 7 years in a pickle barrel?
Oh, boy.
The smell. And I hate pickles, by the way. Apparently, I'm the only one, but
I don't care for them.
Pickles are nasty. Anyway, pickles are popular Christmas tree ornaments to this day, though I'm not sure most people know why.
That's interesting. Yeah, we always had like a pickle ornament. I think it was more from my family's like Polish side. It was supposed to be good luck.
Well, pickled cucumbers are much different from pickled little boys.
Yeah, true.
So I guess there's some sort of a connection in that they're both pickled, but there might be some other wild, random thing about pickles that connects to Christmas, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there's also something about all Christmas figures, even Santa being sort of an all-knowing, seeing force that will find you and creep into the safety of your home at the late hours while you sleep. I mean, just look at the song. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So it's like that kind of looming thread. And there's definitely, upon all the kind of glossed over merriment, there's definitely darkness that could be explored there. So luckily that's what this genre does.
Indeed. Now we have, as you say, Santa's complement, Krampus. This word, Krampus, means claw. While Santa rewards good kids, Krampus beats or spanks the bad with a bundle of birch sticks and whips them with horsehair, which I probably would imagine is something that everybody would be familiar with, horsehair, back whenever this was made, but that seems rather random to me. Black or brown fur covers his body. He has the hooves and horns of a goat. He has fangs and a long pointed tongue, carries chains, and a sack or basket on his back for drowning, eating, or transporting bad children to hell for a year. Jesus Christ. Krampus is Santa's dark companion. All this gives us a tradition which rewards good behavior and punishes the bad. I'm shivering right now. I'm surprised we haven't heard of Krampus so much. I don't think it was even until the movie came out that the word Krampus even entered my universe at all, but I suspect you're probably more in tune with these sorts of things.
Yeah, I definitely was a fan of Krampus before the movie, but it was partially because there wasn't, that's just delicious, enticing, dark roots to explore.
It's like an extension of Halloween. You get a little extra Halloween for 3 more months.
But all tricks, no treats from Krampus anyway.
True.
Part of the reason I was really looking forward to that film when it did came out, also being a fan of Trick or Treat by the same directors. There's a lot of super cheesy B-movie over the top kind of Krampus depictions, which most are, they're all right, but like there hasn't been that many kind of serious, dark looks at something very terrifying to explore. And again, bringing back to the films that we're talking about, that's even though it's Father Christmas in Rare Exports kind of gave me what I was hoping for in a Krampus type film.
That brings us to our 2010 film Rare Exports, the Internet Movie Database, summarizes it as follows, quote, "In the depths of the Korvatuni Mountains, 286 meters deep, lies the closest ever guarded secret of Christmas. The time has come to dig it up. This Christmas, everyone will believe in Santa Claus," unquote. In Finnish folklore is found a character called Joulupukki, which translates into Christmas goat. According to Wikipedia, quote, "Traditionally, before anyone in Finland knew of the Santa Claus tradition, presents were delivered by a man or a boy dressed as a male goat," unquote. Why, you may ask? Well, because the Finnish are weird, folks. My stepmother is Finnish, actually, though I'm not 100% sure she's still my stepmother because she and my dad have since divorced. But my stepmother's mother and sister came to visit from Finland. They brought me this small box of candy, I guess. It was this tiny black licorice treat. And after 2 seconds of tasting one, I was hit with the foulest, most repugnant flavor I could possibly imagine. Even when handing them to me, my stepmother's sister said, "We brought you this." The flavor she described is not unlike sour milk, but they're real popular with the men. Okay, again, why? Again, weird. Before their arrival, I had stepped into the kitchen and was struck with this intense, putrid odor. And I asked her, "Did the baby throw up?" And she looked at me, "Huh?" I said, "The baby threw up?" She just looked at me blankly, and I looked over to the stove, and I understood then that she was simply preparing one of Finland's more popular cooked favorites in preparation for her family's arrival. And we had this very long driveway, went out to the street. Even from way the fuck out there, I could totally smell that ungodly stench. It was horrific. Again, why? Again, the Finnish. They're just Finnish. They're just weird that way.
So the excessive gingerbread eating in the film now makes sense because that's a lot better than maybe perhaps what else
it drowns out the taste of that, the rest of that sour milk, whatever they enjoy so much. The film does have subtitles, though a few bits here and there are spoken in English. And because it has subtitles, it's not the type of movie I could really eat my nachos to. You have to really pay attention or you get lost. But as someone who's normally against the notion of having to read anything, I actually didn't have an issue. It went pretty smoothly. I found a few typos in the subtitles here and there, but I don't blame the filmmakers for that.
Well, Rare Exports, in my opinion, is an absolute gem of dark Christmas tale, and it's breed all of its own. It's really the rare Christmas horror film that I feel like takes kind of that dread and that chilling threat looming over you and just the whole dark lore in like a serious way. It's a refreshing departure from the sort of cheesy, tongue-in-cheek gore-fest killer Christmas movies. Again, those can be fun, but there is, I think, something deeper that this one achieves by taking it seriously. It really explores that cruel, primitive, punishing Santa or Father Christmas in this case, and really digs into the foreboding roots in the legend of the holiday, even beginning with our young hero looking at some of the old dark Christmas tales similar to some of these Christmas witches boiling children alive and and the like. And I think even just the suspense and dread and isolation that it creates, and just that, just the perspective of that childlike wonder, but also the absolute dread and the gutsy instincts that he takes on. So it's really that atmosphere and just how exquisitely the mystery and unraveling of what this dark, powerful, sadistic, original Father Christmas and his helpers might look like.
One might recognize here a strong similarity between Krampus and how Santa was described in this film. It seemed like they were going for more of a merging of Santa with Krampus, or describing an iteration of Krampus solely. And I suppose if you don't know the lore of both sides, you might extrude that maybe there's just an old Santa version of Krampus, but really they're supposed to be two different characters, one a companion to the other. I don't know if they were taking liberties and just merging them for simplicity.
Yeah. From what I'm just reading a little bit up on different legends, it seems like kind of Saint Nicholas maybe started off as like, yes, he would give to the good, but it was also like the threat of punishment, maybe not as severe as Krampus. And it seems like Krampus was kind of born out of him to be the one responsible for all the punishment and bad children. So again, it might be something that's a little bit more prevalent in Finnish culture.
If I could speculate, it might be that having that much evil action on the part of a saint could sully the Catholic Church's name or something, so that it comes up with something more pagan or evil.
Yeah, it seemed like, the church was somewhat involved of like, okay, let's just, like maybe they even kind of liked the threat of, oh, be good or, this devilish creature will come get you. But they liked the image of this more of like an actual devil to the more godlike figure of St. Nicholas.
Maybe they thought goats were particularly horrifying back then, but...
Yeah, I think definitely with the likeness to Krampus and kind of what I would have liked in a Krampus film, that really, again, building that mystery and dread and the idea of this original Father Christmas that was so monstrous. They had to essentially bury him and trap him, and now he's coming free. And what that means for this town. Basically, the threats of Father Christmas punishing children is weighing down on our young protagonist as he starts to see more evidence of it and more other people missing and believing that he's next if he doesn't right his wrongs. So it's just like that mystery and that dread, but also they do a good job of kind of making a point of separating this sort of candy-coated Coca-Cola image of Santa, as it's like referred to in the film, and the commercialization, as well as profiting off from Christmas and remote civilizations, like the drilling that happens that kind of spawns everything. But it's done kind of in a subtle way. There is this like quirkiness and like kind of like an oddball quirkiness, subtle satire to the film without it just being a Joker gimmick. Like it never takes over the serious macabre tone that really fuels the film. I would say in many ways it's an anti-Christmas film, but at the same time it still holds a hopeful survival spirit that isn't devoid of joy, even in an unexpected way. There isn't a ton of gory deaths or excessive blood, so it's definitely not your typical horror film period in that way, but it's more the terror, suspense, and face of darkness that is shown in a more substantial and explorative way. It's a dark Christmas horror film that digs deeper and leaves you with something far more satisfying.
This feature stemmed from two short films that gained notoriety online. The first is called Rare Exports, Inc. in 2003, with the other Rare Exports, The Official Safety Instructions in 2005. Did you watch either of those?
You know what? I remember when I was looking over it, I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll go watch that before. I forgot to do that, but I definitely will. That sounds like, did you watch them?
Yeah, both are actually folded into and expanded upon in this feature. Mm-hmm. I actually think, though, that the shorts more clearly and effectively explain the whole Rare Exports premise and the ending, which I won't give away here, but it wasn't until watching the shorts that I truly understood the feature film's meaning. I also think the tone of the shorts much more clearly expressed the humor element. The feature does have a dark, twisted humor to it, but it's actually played much more serious and like a straight-up horror thriller.
Which I kind of like. I kind of like that, still more dark and serious, but that quirky sort of oddball, subtle commentary is there too.
Normally, you want to establish the tone of a story in the first few minutes, whether it be comedic, scary, etc. In this feature, there's barely an indication it's a dark comedy until very well into it. This is not to say I dislike that, but I did find the shorts to be much more entertaining and had that same high production value and cinematic quality, if not more, actually. They were also more clearly comical in a way that was still serious, and I definitely recommend that you watch them.
Yeah.
In my head, I had the title of it as simply being Rare Exports, but while pausing it during my first watch, the title was shown to be actually Rare Exports A Christmas Tale. And this took me back a bit because when I heard the title for the first time, I remember thinking, I think it was you who told me, actually, Rare Exports, that's an odd name for a movie which really does nothing to describe Christmas or horror or anything clear-cut regarding its premise or even genre. But to see A Christmas Tale tacked on the end, I do think this helps in some way describe the movie's theme, at least categorizes it under Christmas. However, I felt like I was experiencing some kind of Mandela effect. Was I remembering it wrong? Or was it actually only Rare Exports when I first heard of it, and now these things have somehow changed? After a bit of digging, I did find that on IMDb, the title and official poster do call it Rare Exports, with no A Christmas Tale at the end. So I guess this makes me feel better, but weirdly, the very end of the film itself shows the title as, quote, Rare Exports from the Land of the Original Santa Claus, unquote, which is a bit wordy and does help. Like they must have had in the original idea, well, we should include something with Christmas. I tried just looking up rare exports. Like, is that a term? I assume it's self-explanatory to some degree, where maybe a country has a precious item that's only available to them. Therefore, it becomes, quote unquote, a rare export. I tried Googling that, but every time I did, it just called up the movie Rare Exports, or Rare Earth Exports or something like that. Have you ever heard that term before?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think I kind of would have just assumed that it was, if you have exports that are rare, you stamp that on the package. The film's a little bit of a commentary of kind of outsiders coming into this small little village for their resources and kind of taking advantage of what they have while they're suffering. One of the main characters, essentially a butcher, and a bunch of their reindeer are negatively infected, and their business is negatively infected by these people that are coming in and using their land. So it seems like the name kind of taps in a little bit more to kind of taking back what is theirs, especially in, even when they're sort of bargaining, probably could be asking for way more, but they just want what they lost, essentially. I think a lot of the film's sort of a commentary on a little bit of the polished over candy-coated version of Christmas or Father Christmas. And again, this land of the original, if this is, where the original Father Christmas was, but it's maybe a very different dark version, in their plight and adventure against him, that they find a way to utilize it and not fall victim to it, essentially.
There were definitely deeper themes in this film. It felt like a deeper level of thinking went into it. It wasn't just some quirky Christmas film. I found the single father raising his son aspect to be touching, actually. There were themes of growing from boyhood to manhood and the importance of being strong in such a harsh environment. Interestingly, the father and son characters in the film are actually father and son in real life.
Oh, wow.
Jorma Tomila, who plays the father, was in both the original shorts and the feature. His son, Oni, was in the 2005 short and stars in this feature as well. He's like 5 years different in age. He was really small in the second one. But he reminds me of a little, who Clint Howard is? Ron Howard's brother.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of this weird-looking guy that's been around since, I think the first time I saw him, he was in the original Star Trek series. He played who we call the Tranya dude. He offered this drink called Tranya to Captain Kirk, and he was like 5, I think, or 4 or something at the time. He reminded me a lot of this little boy. I've worked with child actors before.
Yeah.
I made a feature that had no less than 5 in it. And it's a funny thing with kids in general, apart from filmmaking, how some are more in the moment and are able to express emotions through a character while acting and really seem to get it. And then there are others who are just so out of it. They're just not there.
Yeah.
I don't know what the fuck is going on in their heads, but they just don't understand or can't comply with the most basic of instructions, while others can perform an entire scene masterfully. There was this one kid who kept looking at the camera every single take, no matter how many times either myself, his mother, or the other actors told him not to. We did like 13 takes, and every single one, he looked at the camera. I think it was like telling someone, don't think of an elephant. No,
Right.
don't think of an elephant. You can't help it. And in this case, telling him not to look at the camera just made it worse. But here we have an actor who was a little boy who, I don't know if he even did any acting beyond this. He just happened to be the son
Right.
of the other guy. But he was amazing. I loved
Yeah.
him. He was so, he was adorable and he had this
Uh-huh.
like weird, unique look, and he could really follow through on all the beats he needed to for
Mhm.
every scene. So I really felt for this little kid. He was almost like, suppose you could liken this film with A Christmas Story with little Ralphie. I don't know.
Yeah.
Except little Ralphie totes a shotgun and is fighting monsters, a real shotgun as opposed to a BB gun.
Mhm.
And he's really in a much more severe, serious sort of film, but you still feel an endearance, if that's a word, for this little kid. So I loved his journey, and I loved how he had a character arc, and everybody had a character arc, and it wasn't just some Hollywoodized, Americanized,
Mhm.
cheesy, zany thing. But in Finland, I mean, Jesus, there was I think what, 2 more films. Let the Right One In was from
Oh,
like,
yeah.
was that Belgium or Denmark? They're all the same to me. They're all that weird sort of section. And then there was The Troll Hunter, which was
Mhm.
similar in that it had this horror monster theme, but it was also a bit twisted fantasy and funny with some ancient lore from that region. So I'm a little bit surprised, but pleasantly surprised that such depth and epic cinematic filmmaking can come from an area where I just imagine it's just so cold they can't really do much of anything, or they just don't really, they're so far removed living in the mountains or something. But that's probably my naive
There's
take.
like a lot of, I think they must just have a way with horror though, because I've seen a lot of like Finnish and just dark, interesting, explorative, character rich, thematic quality, horror. So something about about that gives them a certain artistic eye for the genre, I guess.
Works for me, totally.
But yeah, I definitely agree. The young child actor was definitely great, and he had that childlike wonder and still having this belief in this innocence, and then a large part he's just very gripped by fear and having moral dilemmas. And he definitely goes through a great transformation and journey as he starts to uncover more and more about what's really happening, and has some gutsy instincts and really becomes, the hero of everything. So kind of his fear transforms him and allows him to turn it around. Yeah, and I think a lot of Christmas horror kind of tries to tackle that, where someone who's either feared or flawed or, have made these mistakes is kind of given the opportunity to grow and learn from them and sort of defeat and kind of come beyond that, which is true in Krampus as well.
This is not a long movie. It's only an hour and 24 minutes. The film is actually over at an hour and 16 minutes, with the remaining 7 minutes just being credits. But that's all it needed to be. I don't need a movie to be 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's the quality that's important, not the quantity to me.
Yeah. Like I probably wouldn't have minded. I mean, there's probably somewhere where they could have gone into like a little bit more face to face with this dark Christmas entity kind of coming after them. But yeah, I didn't feel like, oh, that's it. I feel like I needed more. It had a good pacing overall. I know some people who haven't liked this film as much. I think it's on the first end that they felt it went too slow. But for me, it's that the character focus and the dread and the atmosphere and just that fear, that kind of, even Santa Claus, there's always that threat that goes along with a promise of what you might get for Christmas. There is something just about that mystery and suspense and just the visual, just atmosphere of this kind of chilling, secluded place they live. Yeah, so for me, I found it extremely gripping in the beginning, but I guess if know that maybe it's a little bit more of a slow unraveling till you get to the core of this darkness. So yeah, if you're new to this film, just stay with it, give it a shot. I think there's a satisfying reward there.
Yeah, I didn't really find an issue with the pacing. I tend to be very impatient as a person, but
Mm-hmm.
I was engaged, especially through the beginning. I was engaged not just with the story and the characters, but a fascination with seeing another culture.
Yeah.
And that adds something that can't be present in just your standard Hollywood fare, because
Mm-hmm.
here we're seeing a world and a lifestyle that is so divorced from what we're used to. And we have to think about, oh, wow, they have to kill their own meat in order to eat. And they have to keep that fire going because it's really damn cold. And you think about all these other layers that I think are fascinating to me.
Mostly even in just kind of the gritty, primitive, inhuman view of Father Christmas and his helpers, like there's just some really gritty kind of powerful scenes where, especially when silence, it's not like the enticing, biting remarks. But yeah, one scene, to be vague about it, one scene in particular, when they think they first found the roots of, the origins of Christmas and how they're going to go about dealing with it from there. There's just this dark, devilish, empty, void of all humanity glare. And yeah, just very grisly, primitive, kind of interesting and unique view of what this original buried Christmas origins might look like.
Also, there were a lot of old man penises in this film.
Oh, yes.
Did you notice that, Kelsey?
Yes, I did.
On that note, shall we move on to Krampus?
Yeah, let's do it.
IMDb describes Krampus as a boy who has a bad Christmas, accidentally, that's grammatically weird. A boy who is having a bad Christmas would be better, accidentally summons a festive demon to his family home, unquote. Unlike Rare Exports, which was rated R, Krampus is a more zany, family-friendly comedy vibe. Despite having been produced in New Zealand, including effects by Weta Workshop and Weta Digital, Krampus definitely has more of an Americanized, synthetic Hollywood feel, like everything was shot on a soundstage, which it was. When we had in Rare Exports this epic, free, so to speak, production value of these mountains and this amazing grand landscape, here we had what just felt like a bunch of sets. And I would even say the sets weren't that realistic. It didn't look like, let's say, E.T. or some film where you can look at that and go, that's a real kid's bedroom. It felt like a set.
Yeah.
And the rooms looked like they were very large in an effort to accommodate a large crew. Their attic was enormous. They had several stories. It didn't feel real. I didn't feel like I was in a real space. And that was kind of the theme that I felt throughout the entire film. It felt like the opening to, there's a Schwarzenegger film about him having a frantic time at a department store trying to shop and everybody's
Jingle All the Way.
Jingle All the Way.
Yeah, I used to watch that one as a kid.
And then there was a section in the very first act where we have a very strong vibe or homage to Home Alone, where a large family is freaking out and there's chaos, and the characters are all a bit of tropes in themselves. And the commentary spoke of that being intentional. They wanted it to be just a Christmas film for the first act with no hint of horror or anything. So I felt like their homages to these other Christmas stories was all fine and great, and there's nothing really wrong with what they did on paper, but I didn't really buy it, and I didn't really like any of these people except for one or two, but I didn't hate it, but it was just, compared to Rare Exports, it just didn't feel very real to me.
Like I said, I was kind of anticipating this film because I love Trick or Treat. And yeah, I loved the lore and darkness of what could be explored in, a capable, powerful Krampus film. So I actually saw this film first. It was on Black Friday. The director had done a free screening of it, actually, with a Q&A, so he was there. It's one that I like and appreciate, and I think I can appreciate it a little more now, but something about it I can't quite love. But I also have to keep in mind for the intention of what it was meant to be. So I know Michael Dougherty says he wanted it to be a pro-Christmas film. And he also wanted it to be not really quite kid horror, but not quite adult, like kind of that in between where maybe like an older kid could watch it and be genuinely spooked and terrified, but it was still kind of focused on, having that belief in Christmas and appreciating, not the gifts and consumerist side and stresses or arguments you might have during Christmas, but, just the core of valuing the people in your life and your family and, trying to focus on that. So I think, and it definitely has a comedic, satirical tone that's prevalent. I don't know. It's interesting because I love the monsters in it. I think the look of Krampus is incredible. And he really doesn't talk at all, but just that silence, grisly foreboding is really strong and powerful. And yeah, the monsters themselves kind of feel like, one step up from Gremlins or, The Nightmare Before Christmas if Jack Skellington's toys were just a little bit more deadly and vicious, So it really kind of plays with, a gruesome, vicious look at the creatures stirring. I love the chilling visuals and atmosphere more the, snowstorm outside as it becomes Krampus's storm and everything's taken over and the monsters. I would say, yeah, like the house set and things like that. There is a certain manufactured, very Hollywood feel and look to it. And some things that do feel kind of generic. I like a lot of the characters kind of serving as kind of like, I don't know, just more of an adult view of, when Christmas is not always just the magic of the holidays and gifts and treats, but also some things that you kind of deal with more as an adult, like when you have families of different lifestyles or beliefs or difficult people you don't always, enjoy spending time with, and just certain stresses that come along with the holidays. So I kind of like that it takes a look at dysfunctional families and just the messiness or stress of it, but still kind of also has that childlike wonder and bringing a look at when the bliss of the holiday sort of dissipates. I think I think it's not quite as dark as I wanted it to be, and it doesn't focus quite as much on the Krampus lore. And we won't go into the ending, of course, but just where it goes, it ends and you're like, is that what Krampus would really do? And I guess in the end, it kind of works out, that he's there essentially to teach a lesson and all that. It's something that I can appreciate, sort of some of the commentary and the monsters, but maybe it's a little too lighter or more comedic or more of making a point than I would have liked personally in a Krampus film, just to totally go in and focus on the monster and the dark lore and what it really would look like if he had a child that he takes back to his hell domain, Yeah, it's one, I don't know, it's weird because even I rewatched it again and I'm like, I appreciate a lot about what's happening here, but it doesn't also make me feel a lot. I'm not like some even cheesy ones I can be like, oh yeah, it's so much fun. I'm not quite like this is so much fun. And it kind of starts to do some interesting things, but maybe it's not enough of one or the other to really commit to personally speak to me as a Christmas horror film.
I referenced earlier the fact that some of the characters were annoying, and they had described in the commentary track that this was on purpose so that we could watch them grow and turn into more real people towards the end of it. I don't know. I can see that they cast certain actors that were obviously rooted in comedy from The Office and whatnot, and I can see where they were going with it, and on paper, it should work, but as a writer myself, whenever I've tried to collaborate with others, my quality tend to always go down for some reason, but there were 3 writers on this at least, and part of me thinks, well, maybe they had certain common ground that they had to reach. Well, maybe I don't like this, and one of them wasn't even a horror fan, and maybe they had to just sort of make things more agreeable, and it made for a less biting or interesting story that took any risks. They were definitely going for a PG-13, and they wanted it to be like a classic family Christmas film.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you have a film that's of this scale, and this was a Universal film, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
remembering, and I always feel suspicious that when the stakes are that high or there's that big of an entity behind it, that there's going to be more studio interference. And perhaps that was another factor which made it a little bit less edgy.
Mm-hmm.
The previous film of his that I'd seen was Trick or Treat.
Yeah.
And that was more independent. And I felt
Yeah.
that was much more interesting, much more in keeping with what I was expecting for this film. But it didn't reach that level of cleverness and originality
Yeah.
and twistiness. This was just kind of a standard whatever, which they had modeled after the hero's journey, according to the writers in the commentary. And I thought, okay, great. But I mean, it just felt like formulaic.
Yeah, you could definitely, I mean, this is true of a lot of, modern dark Christmas movies, but you can definitely see the similarities to A Christmas Carol of, what could be if he really is just, taking your family for granted. I guess that's the grave mistake here. But, kind of shows the terror and bad fates that they could have, if he doesn't begin to appreciate or, fight for them, essentially. So similar to those roots. But yeah, I definitely agree. It doesn't have quite the smart, cohesive, well-craftedness that Trick or Treat had. And that had a certain quirkiness and comedic moments to it. But I feel like it was more subtly weaved in and not where it kind of overtook the horror. Like the horror and twists and bigger overall meaning of what this holiday can represent was more the driving force. And yeah, you might be right that maybe it was just too many people involved, more, studio wanting it to be essentially a more well-recognized commercial Christmas film, but with some horror kind of weaved in.
I remember was it 99 when The Mummy came out with Brendan Fraser?
Mm-hmm.
I really like that movie. It's not really a horror film as far as I'm concerned. It's more action-adventure, but it was still very, very enjoyable. I've watched it many times. But the director, Stephen Sommers, then went on to make The Mummy Returns, and they had doubled his budget. And I thought the film was half as good.
Mm-hmm.
And then he did Van Helsing, the movie with Hugh Jackman, and they doubled the budget again. So it was like $200 million or something. And I like that maybe 1/4 as much as I like The Mummy. And so having fewer resources makes you more creative.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think more about things and rely on a better story with better characters and dialogue than just writing on the visual effects. And I don't know if that's what happened here.
Yeah.
They did shoot it outside of Hollywood. And Weta Digital, Weta in general, whatever the whole conglomerate is very much embedded in Hollywood and legendary for that reason. But they're still kind of hometowny, and they still have all their heart intact. And I know they put a lot of love into this, but I just didn't respond to it. It didn't feel real. And I didn't exactly hate it, but I definitely didn't love it either.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I've heard of anybody say that they actually loved or liked this film. This is the first time I've seen it, and I almost saw it in the theater when it came out 7 years ago. But I've heard inklings here and there, like it was terrible, or I just got this vibe that it was not received well.
Mm-hmm.
And now I get it. But yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a decent Christmas horror film for what it is and what it was, meant to be. Like, I don't not enjoy, and I can respect a lot of the things that they did, but it's not one that really connects or resonates or invokes that much, aside from like, oh, Krampus looks creepy. That's cool.
Yeah, I loved his look. I loved him jumping off of the roofs and landing on things. You see his hoofs. I thought he was presented really well.
I mean, I love demented Christmas anything. So even like the killer gingerbread and all these different little demonic creatures, like, yeah, that's fun. Again, and I think, yeah, not all the characters are the most likable. And when things escalate and it becomes darker, some of the characters will kind of, in their normal banter, kind of blow it off. Or, I don't know, it becomes a little, not quite gimmicky, but like that's how they would probably respond in that situation. But like it takes away a little bit of like the seriousness and darkness of what they're facing. So it almost comes off as like one line or a joke that kind of takes you out. For me, it's decent. I don't really have strong feelings against it or for it, which is kind of a shame because I was really, before this came out, I was like, okay, it's gonna be good. But yeah, hopefully the future we get more films like along the lines of Rare Exports, which I was kind of looking for more dark, a little bit more serious Christmas horror films with, rewatching or trying to discover new ones, recently. And especially I was looking for ones that focus more on, dark entities of Christmas, whether it's, anyone from Santa Claus, a Father Christmas, to Krampus, to very underrepresented Christmas witches, which I didn't find any for. I did watch a Jack Frost one, which wasn't great, but I appreciated that they, it was focusing on what that fictional creature would look like in a horror scope. But yeah, it's interesting. There's not, and most of the ones that were kind of took a more serious look at them, all foreign.
Well, I think that as time goes on, having horror meshed with Christmas is becoming less taboo. It was a real no-no, I think, back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
But it still happened. And
like Silent Night, Deadly Night, I think, was completely banned. There was like all big uproar from the church of how it was promoting Satanism and all this stuff. But, now it's like a cult classic and they made like 5 films. So, but yeah, that was the other thing. There are a lot more horror films that either just horror that happens to be around Christmas time, or ones where it's like a human killer, but there's, something, even like Silent Night, Deadly Night, where he witnessed a horrific event as a child that of someone dressed as Santa. So he associated that. And that one actually, it's very cheesy, but it actually taps into a little bit more of the psychology of really just childhood trauma. It could have been anything, but it happened to be Santa Claus. And then up from there, was raised at a nunnery who were very cruel and kind of trying to teach him the ways of morality, but also using Santa Claus as he's going to come after you if you're not good. And just the fear that slowly escalates until he kind of just like breaks down. And then the, film picks up from there. But yeah, I found it interesting that there's a lot more human killer sort of dark Christmas than ones that are like sort of all powerful Christmas entities, kind of more steeped in the legends and lore. I don't know. I thought there's something kind of I don't know, that kind of makes its own point too of, just because it's Christmas time and everything's cheery and merry doesn't mean that there isn't darkness and mankind in the world. Like evil never sleeps, so to speak.
We have 2 very different films describing the same subject matter. And I think if somebody were to say to me, let's make a movie about Krampus, I would definitely not do the movie called Krampus. Maybe there's a reason why Krampus was so popular for so many centuries, if not thousands of years. Why not? If it's so primal to us as families and children and so forth to fear some character like that, that should be explored more and in the best way possible. So
absolutely. More Krampus movies and more Christmas witches. Come on, let's get some representation.
Yeah, I never even heard of a Christmas witch until you mentioned it today. So maybe there's some good territory.
There's a Icelandic, there's an Italian one. But yeah, a lot of it's similar. And actually Austrian too. One of them, Perkta, which was the one with the belly slitter one. Some people believe that Krampus was actually based on her. So, yeah, there's some undiscovered potential there for sure. There was one, this was another more Saint Nick one, but it was kind of a mixture of something that attempted to take a little bit more of a serious look, like Rare Exports, but also had its kind of comedic, cheesy, just full-on sleigh fest. But it was called Saint, which is a Dutch horror film that took on a darker look at Saint Nick, basically, from kind of tackling that cruel, domineering, powerful man that he was in life. It kind of portrays as of like he was like basically looting and involved in gangs and cruelty to the townspeople who got fed up, and then they all kind of rose against him and burned him alive. So we get like a Freddy Krueger type of look.
Wow.
But then he comes back as a ghost and haunts and slays and kills. But even, yeah, it definitely had its cheesy moments, but it kind of took on something more similar to like a darker Krampus that, you know, wasn't as candy-coated, picture perfect, it all turns out well sort of a concept. But most of them, and then it was a little different, but I had watched another one, a French horror film called The Advent Calendar on Shudder as well. That was pretty interesting. That one was mostly more focusing on, what was the Advent Calendar that was almost survival games, you know, demented entrapping sort of a thing. But it was the, you know, these each day was kind of and the origins of Christmas that each day kind of represented was kind of the avenue for this evil. But other than that, it could have happened, like it could have been a different device, you know, that happened a different time of year, and it wouldn't have had to be a Christmas movie really. But it played it pretty serious. It really wasn't comedic, cheesy, wasn't like really any other Christmas movie I've seen. But even I don't know, just kind of took a more true, kind of organic, honest look at just what this kind of evil that could be possible this time of year. So I don't know, most of them that I've been most impressed with, all foreign, I'm just saying.
An Advent calendar is something that I've heard that term, and I didn't really look it up until you had mentioned the other day about a movie being called that. And I noticed an Advent calendar is in both Rare Exports and in Krampus.
Yeah.
That is what, basically a thing which counts down until Christmas?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like to count down the days till Christmas, and you get little treats for each day that it gets closer to Christmas. And I think the basis, or maybe the first ones, were more rooted in Christmas and Christianity and different, like in the Advent Calendar movie, it's kind of portrayed as like different saints. So it kind of relates to the Christmas holiday and the origins. But I mean, now they have wine Advent calendars or chocolate or, you know, whatever fandom, or, you know, they have them for like everything now. I guess kind of like a tradition of counting down the days till Christmas, essentially.
It's weird that I somehow that escaped my understanding my entire life. If you'd like to join our Society of Grotesquerie and Loathing, please subscribe and give whatever form of like or approval the platform you are on provides.
Comment your wretched thoughts below, along with what you would like us to expose in future episodes.
Keep our podcast suffering on by finding it in your cold, black, withered hearts to support us on Patreon.
A link to our PayPal is also below for one-time donations of any amount.
It was nice knowing you.